All right. Hey, welcome to the RunnIT Back Podcast, where we believe success lives on the other side of hard work if you're willing to wake up and run it back. I'm your host, Tony Hampton, alongside my co-host, Reggie Guyton. And today's guest, I'm really excited about Andrew Kaza, an Oregon-based author, former sports writer, media executive, entrepreneur. He brings over 35 years of experience in the media and entertainment industry, with executive roles at global powerhouses like BBC, Universal Pictures, Paramount Pictures, and Odeon UCI Cinemas. But in 2022, I got turned on to Andrew because he released High Contrast, the book High Contrast, a story of basketball, race, and politics in Oregon 1972, a powerful account of the historic 1972 Oregon High School Championship between Portland's Jefferson Democrats, the state's first all-black state champions team squad, and the Baker Bulldogs. It's easily one of the top 5 books that I've read in the last 3 or 5 years. This is about hoops, yes, but it's also about race, politics, pressure, and a team that refused to break. The game itself was played in front of the largest crowd in Oregon high school history, I believe, right?
That's right.
And we're honored to have him with us today. Welcome to the program, Andrew Kaza.
Hey, thank you, Tony. Thank you, Reggie. It's a real honor to be here for sure. And like I often say about the book, you can either come for the sports and stay for the politics, or vice versa, because we kind of cover both. You know, a little bit of Oregon's rather sordid racial history for sure is part in there, but it's an amazing sports story. And, I was drawn to it because I always thought somebody should have made a movie out of this. Maybe somebody still will at some point. But
well, hey, let's get Paramount on it, man. Andrew, you got connections there, huh?
Yeah, maybe we can now. Maybe we can.
All right, so Reggie, you want to say a couple words?
We just need to find a good executive producer. But, before we move on, Tony, you talked about how we ran across this book and, a few years ago. But we can't say that without giving a quick shout out to our dear friend, our deceased dear friend, Phil Hopson, man. Phil turned us on to your book. And like Tony said, it's one of the best books that we've ever read. And we're just excited to sit down and visit with you. And we wish he was here to be a part of it. But you know what? He was the one that opened the door. So just glad to be a part of this conversation.
Great. Thanks for sharing that, Reggie. So let's kind of get right into it, right, Andrew and True, a little bit about your background in terms of how you got to this book, right? And we're going to cover a lot of it, but just kind of the high level clip of how you got from A to B to High Contrast.
Well, fortunately, I can bridge the gap between you two, the Jefferson and Grant connection, because my original, sort of touchstone in Portland sports and the old PIL was my old band. My dad, Eugene Kaza, was the band director at Grant High School, band and orchestra director for 12 years between 1957 and 1969. And then he went over to the short-lived and ill-fated Adams High School for about 4 or 5 years before he finished his career at Wilson. But when my dad was at Grant, me and my older brother in particular, and later some friends of mine, used to go to a lot of PIL sports, especially PIL basketball games, because my dad had this little pass that let you go one person plus a friend. It was a 2-person pass, so we could go to any of these games for free. And man, we were so excited to see city hoops as much as we could. And in that winter of 71-72, the fateful year that Jefferson ran the table, I got to see probably at least 5 or 6 games, including the very famous second meeting between Benson High, then led by Richard Washington, one of the greatest players ever to come out of the state of Oregon, played for a number of years in the NBA, and of course was a big star at UCLA, was the star on John Wooden's last national championship team. That was unbelievable. A regular season game played at the old Memorial Coliseum. It got like 7,000, 8,000 people out on a weekday.
Yeah.
Game. And there was a Blazer game that night. They didn't draw as many people.
Yeah.
So it was that kind of excitement that season. And as you guys know from reading the book, unfortunately, I was not able to be at the state tournament itself that year. My mother had taken us away on a spring break trip. Those tournaments were always during spring vacation in Oregon. And so after that year, I don't think I missed another AAA or 6A state tournament, whatever, for about the next 15 years, up till about 1987. I went to every one of them. So, wow. But that was the year I missed. And that was the year that, of course, I was quite taken, as everybody was, with this Jefferson team, which had steamrolled just about everybody, including Benson, to everybody's surprise that year, because Benson was the defending state champion. And then, of course, they end up in this tournament against this upstart team from Eastern Oregon, a bunch of white farm boys from Baker City, what was then just called Baker, the Baker Bulldogs, as you say. So that's the backdrop for the whole thing. And by the way, Tony, not only was that the biggest crowd ever for a high school game in Oregon, but it was the biggest crowd, period, for any indoor sporting event in Oregon, up to the point that the new Moda Center, then called the Rose Garden, was built, because the Coliseum for Blazer games had a capacity of 12,666. So you could jam more in for high school sports. So that was the biggest crowd for any sporting event indoor in Oregon up until the late 80s, early 90s, when the Rose Garden was built.
Yeah, it was bigger than. Was it bigger than the Beatles, who played there too?
Correct. It was bigger than the Beatles, Elvis, other concerts that played there, but you could get a few more people in there. And as I point out in the book, the stated attendance was 13,395, I think. But there was probably another 300 people who jammed in there too, because it was quite porous. The Coliseum was easy to gate crash.
Yeah. Well, I want to ask you a question that is really, really serious, and I really want to know your honest answer. Did you forgive your mother for taking that Eastern Oregon trip during the game of the state championship?
Yeah, it took some time. Yeah, I did. Yeah.
Right on. Well, one of the things I kind of give us an idea of where your interest began with basketball. Did you play as well before you started going to the PIL games, or were you just a fan, or did you also play?
Yeah, I played a little bit, but I was one of these kids who stopped growing when I was about 13 and a half, 14. So by the time I got to high school, I played 1 year of ball at Sunset, and of course we had great athletes at Sunset High out in Beaverton. We ended up winning. Our program won the state title my sophomore year. So I quit playing after my sophomore year because I could see the writing on the wall. I wasn't going to make the cut by the time of my senior year. So I played basketball. I lettered in baseball at Sunset as well. So I was always into sports and music, and I was also into the scene in Northeast Portland, because, as you'll know also from the book, the other thing was I was involved in a busing program when I was in 5th grade. That involved some white kids, unlike most places in the country. And it was a two-way thing where some white kids from Beaverton came to Portland, and some black kids from Portland came out to the Beaverton schools. So I ended up going to Martin Luther King Junior Grade School my 5th grade year. And that, of course, was a feeder school for Jefferson. So that was part of the background there, too.
Yeah.
So it's interesting you bring that up, because nationally, in fact, even in Portland, it was a one-way busing system, that they were busing out and not busing in. So I find that interesting. Was that a volunteer situation for you, or
it was? It was, Reggie. My mother was very committed to civil rights. She ended up becoming a lawyer, and she posed this to me one night. I'll always remember it when she came to me one night as I was going to bed. And she said, "Andrew, would you be interested in going to a school in Portland, a school that's pretty much all black?" And I said, "Where do I sign up?"
Wow.
So I convinced a friend of mine to join me. I wasn't so brave as to do it all. But my buddy Jay Moore and I went, and we were the only 2 white kids in our class, 5th grade class at Martin Luther King grade school. And as I think I mentioned to Tony, one of my classmates wound up becoming a star at Grant later on as well. Welton Jordan was in my class.
Is that right? Okay, yeah. So what type of impact did that have on you? Not socially. I mean, just looking back. I mean, did that have any impact on you at all?
Reggie, I think it was absolutely fundamental for what came in the whole rest of my life. Okay. And I say this because every white kid should have to experience what I experienced. I'm not saying there was racism. What it was you were there as a distinct minority. And suddenly in lily white Oregon, I was able to get the impact of that day in, day out during that school year. And so that set me up for later in life. My ability to operate across a bunch of different cultures, which is what I did in my adult life. Once I went to, I lived in the UK for 25 years in probably what's the biggest melting pot city in the world, London. And also traveled to all these different countries in a couple of jobs that I took on. I don't think I could have done anything. I don't know, or would have had any of the sensitivity for that if I hadn't had that experience back in the fifth grade at MLK.
Wow. 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 That's tremendous. Because I know at the time, the effort was about desegregation, in light of the board versus Brown education. And,
Right. Right.
like I said, it was one-way busing, and not everyone had that experience that you had. And obviously there would have been value had that been the situation.
Yeah, it was a total anomaly, to be honest with you. I don't know what prompted the Beaverton School District to offer that up, and it only went for 1 year. They killed the program after that year. I was gutted because I was ready to go for sixth grade over there, and they said, no, we're not going to continue the program. And there was only 18 kids from Beaverton that did it. I think there was 54 coming the other direction on it. They blamed it on money or whatever, but yeah, it was a one-time thing, and I was very lucky recipient of that. I was blessed to have that experience.
Yeah, it was interesting getting, and I know, Reg, you got some other questions there, but we was obviously part of that busing system and getting bussed out from Irvington to Fernwood at the time for us. And I was thinking about this the other day, man. There's a lot of things that culture learned about us in terms of about Parliament, Earth, Wind, and Fire, Bootzilla, all the different. And then, I started learning about Elton John, Fleetwood Mac, all these other types of bands. So it's just interesting, that whole shift. There was some good that came out of it from a music standpoint as well. And we know that we'll talk about later on. You've got a music documentary that you're working on as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, that's awesome. That's awesome. So let's talk about the book. What was some of the challenges you faced in writing the book?
Well, COVID gave me the opportunity. The first challenge would have been, do I have enough time? And as I mentioned to many people, there was this silver lining for me anyway with COVID. This business that we run, our little movie theater in Sisters, Oregon, was shut, and it was shut for over a year and ended up being 431 days, but who's counting, as we used to like to say. So time was the number one thing, but I had the time. So I realized that I could actually put myself into this. And then that, of course, the second challenge of COVID, of course, though, was that you couldn't exactly go out and meet people in person. So I ended up doing a fair number of interviews over the phone, via Zoom like this. I had several with Tony Hopson, of course. Phil's older brother was a key part of that team. Jack Bertel, who was the coach of Jefferson, was really helpful. I did take a couple of trips out to Eastern Oregon, far Eastern Oregon, to fill out that side of the book. I met with the family of Darryl Ross, who was the big star for the Baker team. He had passed away, tragically, of ALS, but I got to interview his wife and daughter. I went to Baker City to the library. I did spend a lot of time with libraries, both online and offline. I went to the library in, I think, Astoria and Baker. And the Portland Library was instrumental, the Multnomah County Library, because they had this treasure trove of back articles from the Oregonian and the Old Oregon Journal that you can access online. So in terms of the game accounts, and there was so much coverage of high school sports back then. It's not like now where it's kind of an afterthought. I mean, this was day-to-day stuff in Portland. They had a guy who wrote a regular weekly column about hoops and high school sports in the Oregonian. And so there was lots to work from that was contemporary accounts at the time. But I had to spend a lot of time digging into that. There was a lot of research that went into the book, and even further for some of the political and racial history, of course, which is out there, but you kind of have to dig around for it. But I enjoyed that. I'm kind of a junior historian, so to pull those threads together was kind of fun for me.
Yeah, I bet it was. I mean, it was a lot of leg work, and there was a lot out there. I mean, I've done some research in the past about some of the redlining issues, and just to answer some of those questions. How did we all end up in one area? I mean, obviously, Vanport flood. Just trying to learn more about the concentration of African Americans being in that community. How did that happen? With respect to the Great Migration and other things. So yeah, I would imagine that was a fun journey. I would imagine.
It was for me a lot more fun for me, going back and looking at it than for a lot of the people who had to go through it. Put it that way.
That's true. That's true.
One of the questions I have for you is in terms of the lasting legacy, right, of that game, because how's it been? Has it been over 50 years? I mean, it's been longer than that, right? And we're here talking about today in 2026. As you look back, the work you put in, the game itself, and having to watch some of those games, what do you think is kind of the lasting legacy of that particular game and that particular time, in your view, in your perspective?
That's a really great question, Tony, because I think it can be answered on at least two, maybe a bunch of different levels. But let's take it, first of all, as a microcosm of the sport, right? As far as hoops are concerned. It was such a great contrast, right?
Yeah.
Jeff was one of the first teams that was really allowed to just play free-flowing, beautiful basketball, right? And that's why I and so many other people were drawn to watching them play. I mean, it wasn't quite like Jack Bertel just rolled the ball out and said, go for it, but pretty close.
Yeah.
I mean, and that was great fun. And before that, basketball had been pretty staid and pretty conservative. And you didn't let guys show too much of their talents because that might break the discipline that we're trying to build, whatever nonsense they were preaching at the time, right? And of course, that game was the ultimate contrast because that was the game that Baker played. And it took them a long way. The white boys from Baker got much further probably than their talent should have taken them because they had this super disciplined system. And so, of course, the championship game itself wasn't nearly as high scoring as most of Jeff's games that season. I think they scored over 100 points like 6 times in that season or something. It just went crazy because the PIL was basically a get up and down league. So I think that game and that team set the stage for a lot of what was going to come later on in college and pro basketball in the next decade or two. It's interesting to think about, and there's a great documentary out right now, guys. If you haven't seen it, have you guys seen the Soul Power documentary?
Yes, we have. I was just getting ready to talk to you about it. Go ahead.
Love it.
Well, it's interesting to think that this game in '72 was played sort of during the middle of the ABA era. The ABA was representing that too at the pro level, right? So different than the NBA. So I think just from a game standpoint, the legacy definitely lives on. It was the start of something huge. And now you see most high school, most college, and certainly the pro game, operates on the basis that Jeff team kind of started off at. Culturally, on a much more sort of macro level, I think it was important too. And I think the legacy lives on there. I mean, Oregon up to that point in time, man, I mean, Oregon is still, let's be honest, Oregon's still a very lily white state. Compared to the rest of the nation or even the rest of the West. You go to Seattle, San Francisco, LA, Phoenix, wherever, you're going to see much more diversity still today than you do in Portland. But back then, it was really pronounced. It was really pronounced. And this state, I think people across state had no understanding of one another. Yeah, and I talk about this in the book. Even the suburban kids where I grew up, where we had our hair down long, that was freaking out people down in Klamath Falls, in Oregon too. So there was a whole freedom generally that we were kind of coming to grips with there at the end of the '60s and the early '70s that this game represented. And I think there was a taking off point from there for the state and for people to kind of start understanding one another. And, we see this today in Oregon politics. There's an effort to try to make good on how we screwed up and how we greatly demoralized a whole set of peoples, whether it's the folks that grew up in Albina or wound up there, or indigenous people in the state, and those things, we didn't care in the '70s. Nobody was really caring. They were doing what they were forced to do. The busing thing had been mostly forced upon Portland. But there was the beginning, again, of some understanding that took place that night in March 1972 that we're still benefiting from today, I think.
Yeah, when I think about what you just said, and you made some great points, and you think about that Jefferson Democrat team and how it was formed, and we don't need to get too deep into the details, but you think about the Vanport flood, then you think about the redlining that took place, and it put us in a community, a black community in Northeast Portland that we also loved. And it also created these blacktops, Irving Park, Alberta Park, Wallace, all these different parks that you could go, Woodlawn Park, you go play at, that your best and brightest talent was able to play at, combined with the ABA coming on board, and Dr. J and Iceman and the Skywalker. We were more in love with those players than we were with the NBA to a certain degree. And we never got a chance to see them play because those games weren't televised in the West Coast.
Right.
So I like how you drew that correlation between the ABA and also what was happening with Jefferson, because it was real, having grown up in that time, being a young kid, playing ball. But one of the things I want to transition to is when you talk about specifically this team, and both teams were extremely talented. Coach Hammond had been doing it a long time for Baker and had a lot of success. And obviously you mentioned Bertle and also Beachel running the show at Jeff. But what do you think drove Jefferson's commitment to winning a state title? Because when you look at it and you read the book, the year before they got bounced by Marshall. It wasn't like they lost in the state championship the year before, right? And so they got bounced by Marshall, and then there was some selfishness there that Bertle kind of talked about. They needed to overcome. So, in your view, what do you think kind of unified them? Because there were a lot of them were seniors that year to become a championship type team.
Well, it's a great point, and I think that, the players said this too. If you talk to Ray Leary, which I did after the fact, unfortunately Ray is not quoted in the book for reasons we don't need to get into. But there were certain guys that I had real trouble reaching directly for the book, unfortunately. But Ray and Tony, of course, who were the backcourt strength of that team. Carl Bird, who went on to have a son who played in the NBA, who himself was a great college player. I think they knew collectively what they had was better than anybody else in the state, but they had to overcome this behemoth in Richard Washington and his cast of characters, Benson. And the good news for Jeff was the PIL was damn tough in those days. I mean, if it was seeded like they do it now, they probably have 5 of the top 10 seeds in the state in the league that year, right? So you had this guy, Joey Schmidt, playing for Marshall. It was this white boy sharpshooter, kind of a Larry Bird of his era, maybe. We had these guys at Adams who were outcasts from the other schools, but had something to prove. Benson had Washington. So the league, and Grant was Grant. Grant was always good. They had Ed Rooney as coach, and they'd been to the top of the mountain just a couple times in the last 3 years. So these Jeff guys knew what they were up against that year. And here's one thing fundamentally that was different about that team. Most of these guys committed to only playing basketball that year, only playing basketball. And that was a big quantum shift. And these days we think nothing of it. Kids make their commitments early on. I think the flip side of that's kind of unfortunate that we don't have guys playing as many multi-sports anymore. They make up their mind by the time they're like 12. They got their traveling squad for basketball or traveling squad for baseball or whatever. But back then, guys were always thought, hey, you should be playing all sports. And they usually were pulled in. You're going to do track in the spring or baseball. We're going to get you out for football. And clearly all these guys for Jeff could have played multiple sports, and some had in the past. But by the time they got to their last couple of years at Jefferson, they said, hey, we are going to be fundamentally focused on one thing. We are the best team in the state, and we have that to prove. And they weren't satisfied with just being the best in the city, although that was a big deal. They knew going into the tournament, and everybody expected, by the way, there was going to be a third game between Jefferson and Benson for the state championship. And you can thank my old Sunset Apollos. From they knocked off Benson in the tournament that year. So anyway, the focus was there, and it went right down to the fact that they were committed. They were playing pretty much year round, getting ready for the return to the tournament in 72.
Wow. When you think about that team, right? Because the one thing you talk about, I think you make a good point about the vertical focus on just one sport. Right, instead of playing baseball, football, basketball, the whole 9 yards. But what role do you think some of the, and Guyton's going to get into this as well, what role do you think some of what role did adversity and some of the external pressure play in bringing them together? Because your book also talks about, the times that were going on at that particular time. You got you got the Vietnam War, you got the presidential election, you got the urban divide, you've got the racial tension,
civil rights,
some things they were fighting beyond the court, right? As you wrote your book and did your research, how do you think that impacted them from a pressure standpoint?
Tremendously, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because the guys talked about it in terms of, maybe Bartell did too, but they talked about it in terms of distractions that season, right? And that's a very polite way to put it. When you're riding into Astoria, Oregon, from one of their road trips, and seeing effigies and the N-word scrawled on things and people swearing at you in the gym. I mean, there was such utter blatant racism back in those days that everybody was taking a blind eye to, and the Jeff guys really just had to compartmentalize, put that to one side, and say, we're going to go beat these guys on the court. And interestingly enough, other than the one game they lost to Washington during the season, which we could talk about that for a while, but that's a more humorous story, I think, why they lost that one game. But the closest game they had all season up till the championship with Baker was the game in Astoria. And no wonder. I mean, they were facing the most hostile crowd they'd faced all year, and they were being basically demonized and hit with everything under the sun. Now, talking about the larger profile, what was going on in the country, yes, it was, as I talk about in the book, I devote a whole chapter to it. It was a presidential year, 1972, and very interesting. That was the year that Shirley Chisholm decided to run for president, becoming the first legitimate black candidate for president in the U.S., and also a woman from Hawaii by the name of Patsy Mink, who gets forgotten a lot. But she is the woman who helped co-author Title IX. So every woman who plays sports in America owes something to Patsy Mink. So I mentioned them in the book because they were part of what was going on. And as you say, Reggie, Vietnam War is still raging. We know where the Vietnam War's impact was greatest. It was in minority communities, because they were disproportionately representing us over in Vietnam and dying over in Vietnam. And so for sure, that was going on there. And I think what made this so special was, as you guys know from the community, this wasn't just about the basketball team. It wasn't just about the high school. This was the whole community coming together behind this Jefferson team, because they represented something bigger to that community in terms of their achievements. And that's why they're never forgotten, to this day in that part of the world. They just defied all odds and proved something that the whole community could rally behind in a time when there was so much other fractious, negative crap going on in the world. Here was something that people could really feel good about, that spoke to what the future could offer.
Wow. Yeah.
That you said a lot. I mean, some of the questions that I had wanted to ask, I mean, you tapped on pretty much all of them. I mean, those times were definitely different times, and I can't think of a situation that I could foresee that type of game happening again at any level, whether or not it's at the high school level, the collegiate level, definitely at a professional level, maybe at an Olympic stage where you have some country pride, but in terms of what it represented off the court or outside the arena, I just can't imagine that ever happening again. I mean, the impact was incredible, particularly because of the political environment, the social environment, and some of the other things.
Yeah. That was one of my questions I had here. Could a modern day high school championship ever reach this level, right, of social and political significance again? I had that question, and I think that Andrew, you and Reggie kind of answered that probably not. I mean, it was just a moment in time, a little right after the civil rights movement, and all the whole things that were swirling at that time culminated at that event, which is why you had so many people that attended it. But one of the things that this is just my personal deal, I get a little bit riled up when I look and I go, how in the heck did the Jefferson beat Benson at Benson, right? Yeah. They're undefeated. You know what I'm getting ready to ask you. Yeah. And then when they play him before they play him the second time, Jeff is not ranked number 1. They're ranked number 2. I was like, how is that possible? And so you start thinking about the power of the pen and media, you know, and the role that played. That was also, to a certain degree, an obstacle to overcome in terms of this narrative that was trying to be shaped from the reality of what was happening on the court. So kind of talk about that. And then Guyton and I were talking about this before this. Another thing that got me riled up is how in the heck is, you know, Charles Channel first team All-State and he's second team All-City? I'm like, that makes no sense to me. So I'm like, you know, I'll give you the floor on that.
Well, enlighten us.
Yeah. Well, one of the things you might have noticed about the book is I tried to let the stories in some places speak for themselves.
Yes, you did.
Stories that some of the sports writers actually wrote. Now, I'll say it flat out with you in this discussion today. Look, there was some blatant racism, I think, amongst a certain set of the sports journalists that were operating in Oregon at that point. Maybe less so in Portland than the rest of the state, but it was there. So, you know, that poll you talk about, there was, I think, just like today, I think they used to do a coach's poll and a writer's poll, right? And you would have had guys from other parts of the state that would just be like, well, this all black team, they can't be the best team, you know, or we're not going to give them the satisfaction of voting them as number 1, even if they have proven that they're better than Benson up to that point. That's the only thing I can chalk it up to. And, you know, I gave clear examples of the book of some writing from people. You know, I think you can judge for yourself whether they're racist or not, but anybody who's looking at it honestly can see it, and it spells it out, you know, without, you know, spelling the word directly. So I think that was certainly a factor. I think, you know, talking about Charles Channel, the other thing was, man, you know, Charles was the ultimate of free spirits. And
right.
Maybe there was some message being sent by a few other coaches that said, boy, I wouldn't have put up with a guy like this on my team who just would be a no-show 10 minutes before the game or what have you. And we had a couple of fun stories with Charles in the book. But he, of course, was known as the most reclusive of characters. The whole Channel family, generally speaking, like to let their achievements speak for themselves rather than talk about stuff. But anyway, I think that might have something to do with what went down with Charles in particular. But man, what a great family of athletes. I mean, tremendous.
No, tremendous athletes down the road, but tremendous characters in that whole era. I know we're talking about Jeff, but I knew Mr. Rooney well, and his son Mike Rooney. You know, he won the first state championship at Grant High School in '69 with Lincoln and Flowers and those boys.
I was there. That one I did see in person.
Yeah, you did see that in person. So
nice.
and Reggie, I don't know, it was in the book, and I had forgot about it and read it again. You know, he was on Johnny Carson. You know, Coach Rooney, Ed Rooney was on Johnny Carson. Man, it was incredible to hear that in that book, that piece on him as well.
Yeah. There were some characters for sure.
No doubt about it. So when we think about, you know, in terms of for you, right, and you know, what's next? I mean, you wrote this book, and like I said, it's one of the top the top 5 books I read in the last 3 to 5 years, and I really do mean that sincerely, because you tell the story, but you let the reader. You don't lead the reader. You just you have enough facts and information that if you're halfway intelligent, you kind of draw your own conclusions. And I thought that was the beauty in this book. And so when you talk about you in terms of what's next for you, talk about that for a minute, and your documentary and music documentary and things you got going on.
Well, thank you. Thanks. First of all, thank you again for the kind words. I mean, I've had a lot of them, but it means so much more when it comes from a couple guys like you who kind of live the events, know the characters and all of that. So I really appreciate that. Ultimately, you know, that's what it's about for me, to try to do justification to the story. I am working with another buddy of mine from childhood on a music documentary right now for a character that we knew out in the suburbs growing up, who passed away a couple of years ago. He's actually well known throughout Portland and has played with all sorts of people. during his career, a guy named Billy Hagan, and he was a guitarist who played originally was much in the rock scene in Portland. He played for years with a band, local band, a lot of people knew called Johnny Limbo and the Lugnuts. But he also did a lot of work in other idioms. This guy could play classical guitar, he could play country, and his real love was jazz guitar more than anything. And so he played with people like the esteemed Mel Brown, who's still a fixture in the Portland circuit, and with people like Dan Ballmer and Patrick Lamb, who, of course, still is very successful with his sax and with his concert promotion. These are all people that Bill Hagan played with during his lifetime. And unfortunately, Billy Hagan, we've felt, my friend Chris Downey and I, who putting this thing together, this documentary about him, felt like he could have been a world-class musician who could have played with anybody. And he did play with some people like Little Richard, Tommy Thayer, who of course ends up in Kiss, was another local kid from Beaverton. But Bill Hagan had some tremendous demons, like a lot of rock stars, unfortunately. And so he was pulled down really more than anything by some of his addictions. And ultimately, I think he died of lung cancer, but he had a long heroin habit for a bunch of years and drank too much and the sort of things that happens to musicians. But what a talent he was, and we're aiming to try to let the people of Oregon and maybe at large know about that with this documentary. And we're also working with the Oregon Music Hall of Fame to promote a music scholarship program, and we just picked the first winner of that this year. That's going to be announced in June. It's unfortunately for the people in Portland, it is limited to the original Beaverton School District at the time Bill Hagan was there. So we've limited the scholarship applicants to Aloha, Beaverton, and Sunset high schools. But from that, we're getting a scholarship for $3,500 for a kid who wants to go forward in music to do that. So we're pretty excited about that offshoot. That's being run, as I say, through the Oregon Music Hall of Fame. So yeah, the music documentary is taking shape. We've done dozens and dozens of interviews. We've got an award-winning director, a guy named Eric Becker out of Boise, Idaho, who is running the project for us, and Gary Ellis out of Beaverton, who I used to work with at Rogers Cable, who used to do a lot of local sports and is a great cinematographer. He's done a lot of the shooting for us. So this little team hopes to bring this documentary to theaters and screens near you, hopefully sometime in 2027. I think it's the timetable.
Okay.
So, you know what? This is totally off script and I'm taking it a whole different direction. But man, this goes back to 72, probably when you were going to those basketball games, Jefferson, or even your dad, where there was music and band, right?
Yeah.
And Jefferson had one of the best bands around. I mean, it was phenomenal. How do you feel about music not being in the high schools now? I mean, just give me your thoughts on that.
Reggie, I'm glad you asked that because it's criminal. As the son of a music educator, my older brother, Roger, is the first French horn in the St. Louis Symphony. So I come from a musical family as much as a sports background. And it pains me. It really is terrible because that background in high school, is what is basically the foundation for what a lot of professional musicians go out and build from. And without it, I just worry that we're leaving a lot of talent by the wayside that we could be otherwise seeing. So I hope it comes back. I know there's some movements in some places to do that. That's part of what we're trying to do with the Oregon Music Hall of Fame. So, there's, especially with AI coming on the scene, and people are just thinking, hey, we're just going to get AI to create music. God help us. Sorry to school for that. So I really feel like, that's an important thing. And I'm glad you asked the question. We have really got to bring those things back. I mean, for all the concern people have about us, falling in reading scores and everything, I think, creativity in our schools is one of the things that we sorely miss, and we've got to keep developing that. And, as an executive in business, I always thought the most important thing was letting my team be as creative as possible. And when you do that, things blossom, just like with that Jefferson team, man.
There you go.
Yeah. Well said there. As before we wrap up, one of the things that I wanted to kind of recognize and also ask you about, because we talked about the social impact on Jeff, but also the impact on Baker as well.
Right.
when I think about your mother and what she did in terms of volunteering you to be a part of that busing process and going to MLK, you think about the situation with Bruce Clunder for Baker, who ends up from that whole experience just not impacting Jeff players, but also Bruce Clunder, who went to Baker High School and becomes, part of the civil rights movement. And he ends up, dying. I can't remember exactly where that was at, but he's one of the 40 people that's been memorialized in Birmingham in the civil rights memorial. So I just think about beyond just Jeff, there were other people impacted by that played a role in it, and some of them went to Baker.
Yes. Yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because in fairness, one of the things that came out in the discussion with folks, maybe sometimes defensively, people in Baker were saying, well, we weren't a racist place, not when I was growing up. Now they'd say things like, well, there were very few black people there, but we weren't racist. And they would go to some pains to tell me the stories of people like Bruce Clunder, who, as you say, basically died a martyr. It was in Cleveland, by the way. I think in 1963 or 64, he gets run over by this backhoe. And as you say, he ends up being the only person, I think, west of the Mississippi, and maybe the only white person that's amongst the 40 that's listed in Birmingham, as you say. And there was other people from Baker. There's this guy, Bill Tebow. If you drive highways in Western Oregon, I was just coming back from the coast the other day. There's a Bill Tebow Memorial Highway. Well, he was a black guy who grew up in Baker, and he ended up becoming a very well-known, very well-liked engineer with what was the Oregon Department of Transportation back in the day. So he's got highways named after him. And I think he was a great athlete too at Oregon State and things. So Baker, has gone through some tough times. It's interesting because it's a city that still hangs around 10,000 people. But like a lot of cities back in the 60s and 70s in Oregon, was totally dependent on natural resources. And now it's become more of like a transportation hub, kind of tourist place. And I can tell you that 72 team still holds some prominence in their memories over there too. I just did another book reading over there this last fall at a little book fair they had, and people were flocking to the book and very interested in the story. So so I think Baker's, and they've got a history that goes back beyond that I talk about in the book, which is not so great. If you go back to the 1920s, when the Klan was so strong in Oregon, in Northeast and Southern Oregon, man, were scary places to be if you weren't a white Protestant. By the way, they hated Catholics and Jews as much as they hated blacks. I mean, they were equal opportunity haters. But at any rate, Baker has got an interesting story in this whole thing too, and some great sidebars came out of that for sure.
Well, this has been a great conversation. You mentioned it at the beginning, and I'll come back to it as we get ready to wrap up here. Do you think you'll ever be the executive producer of this movie?
Well, we'll see. There have been some conversations. What I really would like to do is get this thing in the hands of, maybe your podcast will help. I want to get in front of former President Obama, because I feel like it might resonate with him and his production company. I mean, Barack, he loves his hoops.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And this is don't matter where you're at, Oregon, New York, or whatever. This is a great story. So, Guy, you have any other questions for him?
Well, I was just going to say on that note, do you want to let our audience know where they can find your book?
Sure. And I have one handy here, so I'll put it up on screen there for people to see.
Yep.
And it is available. Probably the easiest thing is, you can get it off Amazon. Don't just put in the words high contrast, though, because otherwise you get a bunch of like children's toys or something. But if you put it in with my name, it will come up. So Andrew Kaza, high contrast, via Amazon. It's available in Oregon in some bookstores as well, or from the publisher, which is Nastucca Spit Press. You can go to their website also to find it.
Right. Perfect. And is it available in audiobook or anything like that?
It's available as not as an audiobook, but as a Kindle edition. You can get it as a Kindle ebook. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. All right. Well, Andrew, thank you very much, man. We learned a ton, and I had read the book. I learned even more. Again, one of the best books that I've read in the last 3 or 5 years, and hopefully our audience will go out and read it and order it as well. It's a great read. Thank you very much for joining the show.
Thank you, guys.
Go Demos.
Oh, God.